Welcome to Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. I'm your host, Dr. Alan Christianson. Look, you know that between the latest online fads and the crazy media headlines, it's easier than ever to get confused about your health. And you and I just want to feel better and live longer. We want to know what works. And we can't wait for further studies. We need to make decisions today based on the best evidence we've got. Well, that's exactly what this show is here for. So let's get to it. Hey, Dr. C here with you. Welcome back to another episode of Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. So buckle in, hang on. This is going to be a lot of fun. I get to hang out with my buddy, Shawn Stevenson. Shawn, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing great. So happy to see you. Of course, it's just always enlightening talking to you as well.
Well, right back at you, my friend. And I wanted to bring you on to talk about sleep. This has been a huge thing in medical research. One of the top concerns in my audience for quite some time. I love your book, Sleep Smarter, and I love your new book, Eat Smarter. So this is about how we can solve a lot of our big day-to-day problems by eating smarter, by, food is medicine. So for starters, just let me know, how did sleep become an interest of yours? What made you think about this as something to get into?
Yeah, so I was working in a clinical practice as a nutritionist for at that point, it's probably about 8 years, and just working with people every day. And we had the nutrition side really dialed in. We saw some incredible results, folks coming in, on, metformin and lisinopril and just a list of different issues, and just really helping, working alongside their physicians to just help their bodies to get regulated, self-regulated, and just more so based on education and just helping them to kind of reverse engineer. If they're coming in, they have abnormal blood sugar, we walk them through the process, these are the beta cells in your pancreas, and just from the very beginning. And you could see the light in people's eyes when they just realize, like, oh my God, this is happening in my body. And there was this shift in empowerment. And even though we had the nutrition really dialed in, there was always a percentage of people, and I know you've thought about this as well, who weren't getting the results everybody else was getting. And it would ironically kind of keep me up at night. It's just like, are they lying to me? Like, what's going on? Why is this not working? And eventually it took several years in practice before I asked people about their sleep. And when I did, I could not believe what people were telling me. Some folks would be like, well, I wake up every 2 hours, just check my phone, check my email for a little bit, then I'll try and go back to sleep. And just like all of these really wild stories about their sleep experiences. And I found this really interesting thing, which is if your sleep is good, you never think about sleep. All right.
Huh.
And so that's why I didn't ask the question.
That's cool. Huh.
And ironically, my sleep quality was one of the major reasons that I couldn't get well when I was in my early 20s. And I was battling with the so-called incurable degenerative spinal condition. And sleeping at night was the hardest thing. I mean, I would toss and turn. I wake up every time I moved, really, because I get some sciatic pain just from moving around. And so, but once I started to sleep better, I started to heal faster. And so there was things I was doing during the day that helped me to sleep better at night. And so many of these ideas started to come back up in my psyche. And I know this as well, and this is something I know, people want change, but they don't want to change that much. And so I went into the data and I looked for what are some real world practical things people could do to improve their sleep quality without needing to turn their life upside down. And once I implemented some of these things with the people I was working with, I could not believe the results. Folks who were battling with getting their blood sugar in check finally normalized. Somebody who's, battling with weight issues, sometimes for their entire adult life, the weight finally started to come off once we got their sleep dialed in. Hypertension, skin issues, the list goes on and on. Things got better when we got people, when we were able to improve their sleep quality. And ultimately, and one of the things that I talk about in Eat Smarter is I had no idea the impact that what we eat has on our sleep quality, because we could do all of the fancy technical things. And I'm the person, like, Sleep Smarter became an international bestseller. Ariana Huffington used my book in research, yada, yada. I told people about the devices and the environmental changes and all that good stuff. But the truth is, you can have the best mattress. You can have your blackout curtains. You can sleep in a cool environment. If you're deficient in the key nutrients that build your sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters, you're not going to get the results that you want. And so this is a very, very basic core level and an issue that we need to address. So there are these, what I call these good sleep nutrients, but most importantly, understanding the connection. And this is another thing that I really love about your work, the gut brain axis and understanding what's happening there, because we think that sleep is like a head thing, but it has a big, big impact on what's happening in your gut, is really making a major impact on your sleep quality.
So, a couple big misconceptions you've illuminated for us already, one of which is that those who are struggling with what we've called just metabolic disease, inability to use fuel properly and all the consequences of that, that sleep can be an issue behind that. The weight loss, the prediabetes, the blood pressure. So that's a big thing. Another thing you mentioned was that this is not occurring in a vacuum. So we've heard about the flora being a big part of the immune system, being a big part of detox, but yeah, walk us through the gut and sleep and how those things tie in, please.
Absolutely. So the most fascinating aspect. So when I was in my conventional university class, I was taught that, and melatonin is really regarded as this glorified sleep hormone, but it's so much more than that. It's a master regulator of our circadian timing system. It's a master regulator of our biological clock and kind of the diurnal patterns and nocturnal patterns, how we're wired up with nature. Melatonin is determining when other hormones are getting secreted. It's a master regulator. It's so important, so powerful. So I get a little bit, when you put it in this pithy little box, it bothers me a little bit. And I was taught in my university class that melatonin is produced in your pineal gland. End of, like, next chapter, next, turn the page. That's it. End of story. Today, we know that there's upwards of 400 times more melatonin in your gut than in your brain. All right. And you can actually have your pineal gland removed and your levels of melatonin stay relatively stable. I'm not recommending a pineal ectomy at all, by the way, but this is
Don't
this is
try
what
this
we
at
know
home.
now. Don't try this at home. And so here's the thing. It's so fascinating that researchers at Caltech, including others, have discovered that bacteria in our gut communicate with the cells that produce our sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters. There's this it's seemingly magical connection and communication that's taking place all the time. And so much is dependent upon our microbiome. And this has become a big popular part of the conversation, but I want to make it cemented in culture for us to really understand how much our microbiome and this internal ecology, this dynamic diversity of microbes impacts every aspect of our health, but particularly in this case, sleep. And so melatonin, number one. Number two, serotonin. All right. And this is, a lot of people know this statistic, but 80, upwards of possibly 90% of your serotonin is also located in your gut. And this is noted to be like a kind of feel good neurotransmitter, but it's also a precursor to making melatonin as well. And so serotonin having the ability to be produced in the mobilization and utilization in your body, serotonin is kind of noted to be like, for example, when we get sun exposure, our serotonin levels are going to go up. And this kind of just sets the stage of saying, for example, and a big takeaway from today is that a great night of sleep starts the moment you wake up in the morning. So getting that sun exposure, these are the things that our genes expect us to do. And it has these downstream effects, again, being a precursor to melatonin. Also, serotonin, again, located in your gut and also heavily reliant upon an interaction between your microbes and your cells that produce serotonin. And then the last piece here in this conversation about what's happening in the gut, I just want to bring this up because this is a big topic of today, is our immunity. And this was published in the journal Cell Press. And I mentioned this in Eat Smarter as well. And they found that the ability of our immune system to, quote, remember an encounter with the virus or bacteria was heavily, directly influenced by our quality of sleep. All right. And on top of that, and this was published in the Journal of Neuroendocrinology, they found that directly, when we're sleep deprived, we have a direct decline in the production and mobilization of our natural killer cells, which the FDA fast-tracked a drug to target our natural killer cells because they were found to be so effective at kind of, targeting SARS-CoV-2 infected cells. And so our sleep is a major determinant of what's happening with our immune system, with our sleep quality itself, being all something that's kind of happening in our gut and in that sphere. And all of this stuff ties together. And so that's the base of this conversation, the foundation of it is that what's happening in our gut is directly impacting our immune system and also our sleep quality.
That's cool. And I think an important point to think through is that the things that happen to our gut when they affect us elsewhere, the implication from that is it's something that we've got leverage over. It's things that we can make choices and influence. We're not just held hostage to. So if there's these regulatory mechanisms that are connected, why does this go wrong, and why is this relevant to modern life? How has this been played out in the modern world now?
Yeah, that's the thing. When I talked earlier about regulating our circadian rhythms, our biological clock, the thing about humans is that there's this veil, like we don't really understand today that we are part of nature, and we can kind of hide out from nature, ironically, but your body is still seeking to find patterns. The human brain is just obsessed with finding patterns, with being able to automate behaviors, to find cycles. And today, with our high levels of stress, with our consumption of brand new, processed, just absolute things that have never existed before in human history, the stuff that we're putting into our bodies creates so much dysfunction and dysregulation within all of these processes. And so one of the things, and this is like a walk away thing for everybody today, and understanding how our microbiome affects our sleep quality. What are some of the things that, first of all, and this is the same thing with what you do as well, let's remove the problem. Before we start talking about things that we could do to like supercharge things, let's get rid of what's causing the issue. And so being more cognizant of the things that we're putting into our gut, because they will inherently affect your microbes and thus your sleep quality. So what are some of the things that today we're exposed to on a regular basis that could be causing damage? Obvious, well, maybe not so obvious, but now we've got real, like hardcore data on this. Pesticides, herbicides, rodenticides, fungicides. These are all designed to kill very small things. And you are made up of very small things, especially your microbiome. And they're usually, estrogenic or neurogenic. So they're targeting the reproductive cycle or the nervous system of these microbes to damage them, to stop them from being able to reproduce. And so we want to be a little bit more aware, if we can, to avoid those things. It's hard today. It's hard, even with all the regulations, the labeling, all this stuff. These things are so just immersed in our environment. We're immersed in it. It's really hard to run from it. You could test the very best organic kale and you're going to find some nefarious things,
Mm-hmm.
just because we're all existing in this earth bubble, and we don't really get that as well. Like we're all together here. And so, but we can do our best. We can be aware of it, and we can choose to, get organic or things that we know we have an association with the farmer and know their practices, and just continue to help to usher in change by voting with our dollar, so that these practices become the norm, because what we're experiencing today is far from it, very, very far from it. So that's number one, avoiding things that are well noted to kill your microbes. Also, haphazard use of antibiotics. I don't know about you, but I've been given antibiotics. I've been prescribed antibiotics for things that weren't bacterial infections several times.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this until later. And it was just one of those things where in medicine, and it's still happening today, but not at the levels, I think, because there's more awareness and conversation about this stuff. Patients are just questioning it. But I've had folks come into my office, and I don't know if you've ever seen this before, that have been on antibiotics for a skin issue for a decade, and it's just like, I can't, but I literally, when I see the paperwork, I can't believe that this is a real thing for a decade, and not understanding for many of these different antibiotics, they don't care what jersey the bacteria is wearing. They're going to go in and they're taking out a lot of stuff. And now one of the things, just tying back to, the mission with Eat Smarter, one of the things that we know today is that our microbiome diversity is directly correlated with our body composition. And so as our microbiome diversity goes down, our body composition and our weight tends to go up. And if we look at folks who are eating more of an indigenous diet, who, more of a kind of hunter gatherer, and you look at their microbes, they have 4 times, 5 times, upwards of 10 times more microbiome diversity than the average Western citizen. All right. If we're looking at this in terms of a rainforest, like that's one of the analogies folks use for microbiome. We have a lot of endangered species here in the Western world. We have a lot of things that have gone extinct. And some researchers state, and I don't completely agree with this, that we can't get some of these back once they're gone.
Mm.
I don't like to speak in extremes or to have my belief system based there. I think that it's possible that we can fix this. And the reason I say this is because of the new science that we have now with fecal transplants. And we see, for example, this was published in the journal Cell, and I talk about this a lot too in the book. They discovered that there's a specific bacteria in mice that actually block their intestines from absorbing as many calories from their food. And thinking from that allopathic lens, it's just like, okay, whatever bacteria that is, we need to put it into a pill, we need to sell it, right? And not understanding, is that necessarily a good thing? And couple that with human studies, and this was from the Weizmann Institute, found that if a patient would come in, if they get a stool sample and I see their paperwork, I can know whether or not they're obese before I even see them with 99% accuracy. We know now there's a specific bacteria cascade that is associated with obesity and type 2 diabetes. And so what they did was they took the fecal samples from folks who were obese and insulin resistant, and these quote fat bacteria, and implanted them into lean mice. And they also took fecal samples from healthy human subjects, from lean human subjects, and implanted them into lean mice. The mice that received the human quote fat bacteria became insulin resistant, gained weight, and gained body fat. Nothing else changed in their mouse diet compared to the lean mice receiving the healthy human subject fecal samples. And this is telling us directly that our microbes are directly determining whether or not we're absorbing the calories from our food and how our body is using those calories. It's all tied together. And so, and just going back and putting the bow on this with sleep, avoiding things that damage our microbes if we can. So pesticides, haphazard use of antibiotics, and also even things that we kind of don't really think about in our day-to-day life, like your water source. You know, is chlorine coming through your tap? You know, chlorine it's there to kill pathogens. Mm-hmm. And this is the thing. It's like, it's not that we don't want something there to kill pathogens, because that was one of the big jumps in our longevity, is being able to have clean water. But is there a better method? There absolutely is, but it's not being used it's not widespread in its use. So if you can get yourself an RO filter, or maybe get yourself a high quality spring water source, or something of that nature, that you're not continuously bringing in chlorine into your body. And by the way, the Brita filters, and this is what I did when I first learned about this stuff, just in passing, I was like, oh, I'll get a Brita water filter. Brita is made by Clorox, and it says on the package, removes the smell and taste of chlorine. It doesn't remove chlorine. All right. So just thinking about, even for many of us, it's just, we're jaded. We're jaded by water. We don't really even notice that any of this is happening. So taking care of the things we're putting in our bodies, from our food to our water source. And then from there, after this foundation, we can talk about what to actually add in to improve our sleep quality.
You know, I love that. Thank you for that. And I love the quote about how sleep starts with what you do in the morning. You know, it's an odd thing. And I'll mention this. I'll love your take on if you've heard more about why this is thought to occur. But there was some research I've read from the late 1800s, I think. It was quite a while back. Maybe it was early 1900s, but they had researchers, they themselves spent about a month and a half in some caves and just watched, based upon basal body temperature, other metrics, how their body's circadian rhythms played out in the absence of a daily sunlight rhythm. And this has now been confirmed quite a bit. It seems that human biology is not quite set on a 24-hour day. You know, we're set on slightly longer cycles for whatever odd reason. And so it does take something on a recurrent basis to like recalibrate the watch and get us back to where that rhythm is. Otherwise, we will drift off from that. Have you heard more about, I don't know, the hows or whys of that mechanism? Or?
So first of all, you're in Arizona, right?
Yeah.
So you guys don't go by the daylight savings.
We don't. No.
So already, like, just 2 times a year, our entire population, almost, but shout out to Arizona and Hawaii, I believe, as well, just throws off this clock, and your body is constantly trying to find a rhythm. But even that rhythm, there's fluctuations within it. It's not just like this very hard set 24 clock, like you just said. This is the thing. It even depends on the time of year it is. It depends on how far you are from the equator. So many factors go into your sleep requirements, and they're constantly changing. Even if you're right now, somebody, maybe they're training for an event, or maybe they're under a certain amount of stress, or a whole list of things is going to affect your body's need for sleep. And also, the quality of your sleep can be radically changed depending on manipulation of these different factors. And so, if we can, to dive into a little bit with the nutrition side, and like what nutrients are required for some of these things, because what's so funny is one of these, I'll start with one that a lot of folks kind of know about because of just like memes and, just like funny things in our culture. But turkey, for example, is like associated with, Thanksgiving, like taking a nap, being sleepy, tryptophan. All right. Now, there are a bunch of other food sources of tryptophan, but one of the most interesting studies found that just specifically deficiency in tryptophan, and this is critical. This is a very, very important nutrient for many other things besides sleep, but deficiency in tryptophan directly leads to disruptions in your REM sleep. All right. So your rapid eye movement sleep. REM sleep is so important, and I can go through a list of reasons, but one of the most important is this is where a lot of your memory processing takes place. So converting your experiences into your short-term memory, which is kind of important. And also just, it's a major facet of our overall recovery. Alcohol, like the whole phenomenon that we have in our culture with the hangover, creates what's called a REM rebound effect. And your REM sleep is suppressed. Even though you might be unconscious and knocked out sleep, your REM sleep is dramatically impaired. And this is one of the big reasons why we have these, quote, hangover symptoms. It's not just because your body is great at getting rid of alcohol. As a matter of fact, your body will preferentially use alcohol when it comes in. It's one of the 5 macronutrients. We only talk about 3, and also fiber, of course, is like coming off the bench. But alcohol, funny enough, it creates something what we call, quote, fat sparing. And I'm just going to say it. It might be that the substance is toxic to the body, or it's just very easily used. So your body will switch gear from using stored glycogen or glucose, and will immediately, when alcohol comes in, it will immediately use alcohol because your body can't store it, which is another reason. So now here's the thing. Consuming alcohol does in fact help you go to sleep faster. It does in fact help you to fall asleep faster. And many people know this. They have a glass of wine before bed. It helps them sleep better. Fall asleep faster. Let's be clear. However, your REM sleep can be impaired by this. And when we're talking about, so of course, by the way, this is not an advocacy against alcohol at all. All right. It's just being aware of these things and understand the impact that these things have on our REM sleep. And notably for our conversation today, a deficiency in a simple amino acid that's critical for our health can be causing some of the same similar things on a different scale that alcohol does to your REM sleep. So we need to make sure we're getting in adequate amounts of tryptophan. So what are some of the sources? And by the way, so that study I mentioned earlier about the impact on your REM sleep, I talk about it in Eat Smarter, but it's also in the journal Nutrients. And so what are some sources of tryptophan? Turkey's famous, but also chicken. Lobster is a great source. Eggs, and you'll find eggs are a great source of so many of these nutrients that are important for sleep. Cheese, chocolate is a good source of tryptophan. Of course, we want to get the best stuff we can. And then plant foods like spinach, pumpkin seeds, peanuts, spirulina is also a good source of tryptophan. So there's so many different foods. If you're eating a diversity of foods, going back to the diversity of our microbes, the number one thing that we know today is that increasing the diversity of the food you're eating increases your diversity of microbes, because your microbes need their preferred food for them to stick around. And so that's number one, tryptophan. And if I can jump in here and, oh, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, go for it. I'd love to hear a couple more top nutrients for sleep.
All right. So another one, and It's so cool to be able to talk to you because I really don't talk about this one often. And this is one that doesn't have that much evidence. The anecdotal evidence is bananas, but glycine. All right, glycine, which bone broth is one of the hottest things on the street still. And it's an amino acid that's been found to be particularly supportive of your sleep. And this was published in Neuropsychopharmacology. And it found that glycine appears to improve deep sleep time and reduce wake after sleep onset, meaning that you wake up less often. All right, so glycine, we've got some evidence on its effectiveness improving our sleep quality. And good sources include, chicken, beef, turkey, salmon. There's a little bit in like quinoa, Brazil nuts, but one of the most remarkable sources is bone broth. And so that's one of the reasons that, so many folks, again, just anecdotally report sleeping better when including some bone broth. But something just for everybody, if they're doing a vegan or vegetarian approach, that's particularly important right now is vitamin C. We know about it in relationship to the immune system, but this was cited in the journal Appetite and also PLOS One, found that insufficient intakes of vitamin C increases the likelihood of sleep disturbances. And also has been found to shorten your overall sleep time. So being deficient in vitamin C causes interruptions to your sleep and also reduces your overall sleep time. And there's so many sources of vitamin C. It's one of those things that can seem like it's pretty easy to get, but I personally believe that vitamin C is also works in modulating stress in our bodies. And where's our stress levels at today? They're higher than ever. So I would recommend that we be a little bit more adamant about getting in some high quality sources of vitamin C. And as you'll find in Eat Smarter, I'm very big on food first. And
Mm-hmm.
so we all know about the kind of common foods, the citrus, kiwi fruit, green leafy vegetables, bell peppers. But then there's these like super sources of vitamin C like camelberry, amlaberry, acerola cherry, and even supplemental forms. If you get it from a good source, can be helpful, especially right now. And I'll share one more. There's so many that I could talk about, but this one right here, for myself personally, this one I noticed the difference, and it's magnesium. All right, magnesium is responsible for this was just 3 years ago. I would share it was responsible for over 350 biochemical processes that we're aware of. Now we know there's over 600 processes that are dependent
Wow.
upon magnesium.
Wow.
This means, to make this very granular, this means there's 600 processes your body can't do or can't do effectively when you're deficient in magnesium. And it's well noted to be the number one mineral deficiency in our world today. About 60% of the US population is deficient in this mineral. This one has a lot to do with stress as well, modulating stress. And so this was a 2016 study. And this reported that magnesium is able to reduce the activity of your sympathetic fight or flight nervous system and turn on the activity of your parasympathetic rest and digest, quote, rest and digest. I'm doing air quotes for people that can't see me, nervous system. And this was another study. This was published in Pharmacological Reports, stated that magnesium is able to interact with your inhibitory GABA receptors, helping to reduce anxiety and improve your sleep. All right. Magnesium is so important. Food sources, anything green is a good source of magnesium. And I really love like these kind of dense green algae, spirulina, chlorella, but also chocolate, again, is another good source of magnesium. Pumpkin seeds, avocados, fatty fish, black beans, so many great sources of magnesium. But also this might be one to, again, find a supplement for. Food first, but it's such an important thing, and our bodies really use it very quickly. But I also love topical magnesium too, so that, like, you rub on your skin, like supercritical extracts. Epsom salt is a form of magnesium, for example. It's well noted, again. So many folks, just a lot of anecdotal evidence, but we do have some data showing that it does in fact help to reduce stress, speed recovery, and help you to sleep better.
Have you seen data about percent topical absorption for magnesium? I looked around for that a while back and didn't turn anything up. Haven't thought about that for a while. And I don't know if you've seen any numbers before about it or.
Yep, it depends on the method that it's produced. And so most of them, like, this would be somewhere in the ballpark of like 60 to 70%.
Oh, wow.
And it's not bad. But then
No,
there's
that's
like
huge.
supercritical extracts that can have much more absorption. But here's the thing about it: through your skin, your body will only absorb as much as it can. Like if you absorb that amount of magnesium that kind of tips you over what's needed, this can cause all kinds of downstream effects. Like, for example, if we take it internally, it can cause diarrhea really quickly. All right. The different forms, especially like magnesium citrate, for example, it pulls water to your bowels. And so, I would have folks, even myself, take the magnesium supplement. And if you have even like a tiny bit too much, we call, I call this disaster pants, so we're running off to the bathroom all the time. So it depends on the method that it's produced as far as the absorption. So it's a big spectrum.
That's cool. So some big nutrients, tryptophan, vitamin C, magnesium, super important ones. Um, Love to hear just like a couple favorite foods, just foods themselves and their particular effects upon sleep. I saw some studies you talked about on how food specifically can have effects that are, might be from the nutrients, might be something different. But yeah, any couple more foods that maybe you didn't mention just yet.
Sure. I might have mentioned this, but I mentioned this so briefly. Fish.
Hmm.
This is so remarkable. And researchers at University of Oxford found that improving your intake of specifically omega-3s can reduce sleep disturbances, help you get more restful sleep. And another study, this was published in Frontiers in Neurology, discovered that these omega-3s, we all know that they're kind of noted to be this anti-inflammatory camp of omegas, are able to reduce symptoms of sleep apnea. All
Wow.
right. Omega-3s are so freaking important. And as we know today, for most folks, we psychologically will tie it to fish, like fatty fish. But a lot of the data on DHA and EPA is done on fish oil. And so, but we want to be mindful of, again, about the sources, but also if you're taking a vegan or vegetarian approach, what do you do? Even if you just can't stand fish, what do you do? Then we have krill oil, which is also really, I mean, so many cool things about krill oil. The astaxanthin that's in there, but this is a microscopic shrimp. And so for some people in their ethics, even though if they hear the word shrimp, they're like, I can't do it. I'm talking microscopic. You're more likely to kill sentient beings just, I don't know, swallowing or breathing or talking. But so krill oil, but then we also have some algae oil products today. They don't have a lot of clinical evidence though. So 99% of the data is on fish oil. Then krill is that we've got growing amounts of data. Algae oil hasn't been tested that much. We do know the DHA and EPA is there because specifically, this is not just omega-3s, it's DHA, specifically DHA and EPA. In plant sources as ALA. And they have benefits. But we're talking about what's getting into your brain, specifically being able to cross the blood-brain barrier and to nourish your brain cells. These work as supportive, like structural fats for the brain. And that blood-brain barrier is very selective in what it allows in. DHA has been noted to directly improve your memory, to directly nourish and support your brain cells and help with signal transduction. So your brain cells can actually communicate with each other. It is that important. All right. So ALA from chia seeds, flax seeds, all that good stuff, hemp seeds, they have benefits, but they're not the same thing. And also, DHA is so important. Your body will convert some of that ALA into DHA, but you lose, 80, 90% possibly, depending on, again, your unique metabolic fingerprint, you lose so much of it in the conversion process. And to get the amount of DHA that you need from plant sources, you're going to have to like mainline chia seeds into your body like 24/7. And you might as well just stay in the bathroom. It's not viable. It's not a viable thing. So I want everybody, if you can, walk away doing one thing, be more adamant about your DHA and EPA sources. It's critical for your sleep quality and absolutely critical for your brain. And of course, food first, fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, but even more so, there's 3 times more DHA in fish eggs. So caviar, salmon roe, there's so many options here. And then there's other foods as well. Eggs, the egg yolk, grass-fed beef. There's so many other sources too, but fish are noted to be the superstar. And we did have a study, this was published in the journal Neurology, found that folks who eat just one seafood meal per week do in fact perform significantly better on cognitive skills tests than folks who get less than one seafood meal per week. So it does show up in the data to be pretty effective.
That's really cool. Yeah, great book. One last thing I just wanted to highlight for the listeners that you and I have talked about, and in some ways, I don't know, we don't get too deep into the food fads, the various food camps, but just the relevance of protein. You mentioned this and talked about some specific amounts, and I love that because we always hear that we can't be protein deficient, and okay, that's fine, but what amounts are best? And the data about protein and its effects upon metabolism and satiety and body composition. And I just loved how you went into that in this book. And, the amounts that seem to be most effective are amounts that people might not fall into unless they're thinking about it. So yeah, just love to hear what's top of mind about that topic.
Oh, this is so important because, as you know, many of our friends and colleagues, they're infighting about minutia. The big debate now is like the debates between carbohydrates and fats. And protein is like Rodney Dangerfield of this situation. It's like,
And
you
that's
get
what
no respect.
matters.
And protein, when we're talking about these different neurotransmitters and hormones that we've been talking about and highlighting here, these are based on protein. It is so important. It's like a building block of all of these things about you. It is so critical. And also protein is well noted to be like the top of the chain in having that thermic effect of food, because it's not just the calories you consume, it's the type as well. So the type of food itself, and also the digestive efficiency that you have, because here's one of the big walkaways I want for everybody as well, is that you have a very, very unique metabolism, a very unique metabolic fingerprint that has never existed in a human before you in the history of humanity, and will never exist in any time moving forward. Never. And here's the crazy part. This is the rub. Your metabolism right now, your unique metabolic fingerprint, is going to be different next week. It is that fluid, that changing. We are ever evolving, always, our bodies are always in flux. And this is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. But this can also create, because of so much diet dogma, can create such a stigma around change. We might get some results doing a diet framework, a popular diet framework for a while, then all of a sudden it stops working. And we blame ourselves because the diet, it worked before, why isn't it working now? And so we'll just keto harder, we'll vegan harder, and blame ourselves, and not understanding that this diet framework can be imprisoning us and putting us into a box that we can no longer operate and do what's best for us and what our body is really calling out for, what our genes are expecting us to eat. And so, with that said, a big conversation that needs to be had is regarding protein. There's a myth, and this is why I love your show. You have the best show title. There is a myth that here in the Western world, people are consuming too much protein. It's a myth. If you go and look at the data, there are populations who are definitely eating a very high ratio of protein. But this gets into the conversation of the quality of the protein that they're eating as well, because all of these things matter. And so just using this one metric of the thermic effect of food, it costs calories to absorb calories. It costs calories to consume calories. The very process of eating requires, the chewing, the release of the digestive juices and the saliva and the swallowing and the stomach churning and the release of, stomach acid and bile and moving the food through your gastrointestinal tract, and the intestinal lumen absorbing the nutrients and getting it to your bloodstream, into your brain, into your eyes. And there are all of these miraculous processes taking place that use energy to digest energy. It costs calories to absorb calories. The most expensive to process is protein. All right. You're going to use about 20 to 30% of the protein that you consume just to digest the protein. And so if you're consuming, we'll say 100 calories of protein, you're going to use 30 of those calories just to digest it. And this is because we're taking these protein structures and your body's breaking it down into usable amino acids. It is so important. Your body is absolutely ravenous for amino acids because they're used for so many things. And so, and then with carbohydrates, you're going to use about 10 to 15% of the carbohydrates you consume to process those carbohydrates. Fats, somewhere in the ballpark of 0 to 5%. Your body is great at absorbing fat. All right. It is fantastic at doing that. And this is an evolutionary advantage. It's also so important for so many processes. And so, being that this is the case, when we are not highlighting in the recommended daily allowances for protein are really based on preventing a protein deficiency. All right. And so for most people who maybe they're getting in, we'll just say 30 or 40 grams of protein in a day, but they're getting in a buttload of carbohydrates, right? Or a buttload of fats. And they're missing out on this critical component, which is a protein. And one of the studies that I cited in Eat Smarter, and this was based on high performing, extremely healthy athletes and their protein requirements. Obviously, their protein requirements going to go up, but maybe it's the same for all of us, for the general population as well, increasing our ratio of protein a little bit, because it can go from 30 grams of protein to prevent protein deficiency that you need, 30 or 50, and not understanding for us to really thrive and for our metabolism to be working at its optimal level and just providing the building blocks that your body needs to do all the cool stuff it can do. It was like 130 grams, 150 grams in some of these studies. And their cardiometabolic performance, everything got better, because one of the things, like if you eat all this protein, you're going to die, right? It's going to affect your heart. It's going to affect your kidneys, all this stuff. And it just isn't in the data. It doesn't work like that. And somebody specifically, Katie, right? Katie Wells, one of her game changers was for her to shift and increase her ratio of protein.
Yeah.
And something she's been battling with for years. Of course, she's working with her on her psychology, but opening herself up to doing this thing. And it's amazing. Like I just saw her not too long ago. And this isn't talked about enough. Everybody is infighting about carbohydrates and fats. They matter. They absolutely matter. But we really need to look at our intake of protein because it's so important. And of course, we get into the quality of protein is such an important topic as well.
My health journey, I had early life issues, and the first basic steps I did, things turned around. It was great, but I got more into fads and early restrictive things in the 80s, and really wrecked my health. And the biggest variable that affected me the most was just my protein intake. When that would go low, I would have cravings. I wouldn't recover from my training, and I just thrive on. I do a lot of training. I run these days. I'm an endurance athlete, and 165, 170, I'm somewhere around that weight. And I do so well on about a gram of protein per pound of my total body weight when I'm training hard. And yeah, I recover. My blood sugar is stable. I stay lean. I'm not ravenous, and it's just such a huge thing. And I hear that so commonly from people. I've had many folks to where I had one patient I completely can picture her mind in my mind. Name was Anne. I won't give more details, but she was practically disabled from fatigue and diagnosed as chronic fatigue and not functioning. And that one change, getting her to, you talked in the book about, quarter, third of the calories, maybe a gram per pound of body weight, maybe a gram per pound of lean body mass. But yeah, somewhere in ranges like that, she came back to fully functioning from practically disabled from that one change. So I've seen that be just such a huge factor for so many people.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up. And even just sharing the ratio that you're targeting and taking in. For some folks, it might sound unusual, and you also mentioned something really important that I almost overlooked. And I talked about this in depth, is how it affects satiety. All right. This is so important. One of the biggest determinants of a successful diet protocol, most in our society, we relate diet to weight loss, most likely in our psychology, but it's so much more than that. But one of the biggest issues is dealing with hunger and cravings. That makes everything harder. It's not that you can't willpower your way through. It's just harder.
To a
And
point.
your willpower, it is finite. It is finite when you see your willpower versus your biology. And unfortunately, it's been impressed upon culture. And I don't know how many times, patients you work with have had this idea in their mind, but I would have patients that I'm working with, and just over the years, and this was kind of impressed upon our culture from a real pioneer. She was definitely a pioneer, Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters, who's the person who took calories from the world of like physics and engineering and really embedded it into popular culture here in the Western world. And she related hunger to being successful dieting. That's when you know that it's working, essentially. And she also impressed upon culture changing food into numbers, right? So something that's multifaceted, dynamic, powerful, it makes up your brain, your eyes, your heart, your blood. into numbers. And again, it wasn't that she was trying to be nefarious. It's just not, it was such a small lens to see food through. And so she said that you will no, and I went back and read her old fangled writings. This was like early 1900s. She said you will no longer eat food. From now on, you're going to eat calories of food. You will no longer eat a slice of bread. You're going to eat 100 calories of bread. You'll no longer eat a slice of pie. You'll eat 350 calories of pie. And she relented that a woman of her height could eat whichever she wanted as long as she maintained a strict 1,200 calorie intake. Sidebar, she battled with her weight her entire life. She
Oh,
battled with hunger and cravings. And she also related these issues to being character defects and
oh,
relating food with morality. And these are the things that have permeated our culture,
yeah.
things like punishment and sin. And she said that for every hunger pain you feel, you should have a double joy, knowing that you're saving the hunger pains in another person, because this was during a time of food rationing. So she leveraged human
Wow.
psychology to make people think that hunger is appropriate. We know that if you're hungry, something is off. There's something going on. If it's just a basic biological, quote, normal feedback that you're hungry, cool. However, experiencing consistent hunger and cravings, your body is giving you feedback that something is wrong. Chronic nutrient deficiency leads to chronic hunger. Chronic nutrient deficiency leads to chronic overeating. Protein, as far as the data shows, is the most associated with the release and also sensitivity, because you also have to have uh, uh, leptin sensitivity with the release and receptor site sensitivity of your most prominent satiety related hormones. We know about leptin and ghrelin; those are like the big ones that pop, but there's so many others. There's CCK, there's GLP-1. GLP-1, guess what affects it the most? Protein, all right? As far as it's in a beneficial way, but it's very sensitive to insulin. So if the carbohydrate protein ratio is skewed, you're not going to have the proper performance of this satiety related hormone. Adiponectin is another one. This can get dysregulated. Protein is important. Protein is a building block for making these things. So I can just go on and on. It is so important for satiety. It's so important for recovery. It's so important for just managing the overall performance of our metabolism. But it's been demonized because of like this hyper focus on heavily processed, denatured, weird protein sources that we're eating today. So I think it's coming from a good place with researchers who are talking about this thing. But if we actually go and look at the data, we see that many folks in our society today can do a lot better improving their protein ratio.
Yeah. So this has been a blast. You guys now know why I like hanging out with Shawn and why we like to talk about this stuff. Um, kudos on the new book, my friend. I was lucky enough. Thank you for sending me this advanced version. By the time you're hearing this now, it will be available for the public. You'll be able to get this too. But so much good stuff to learn. And Model Health Show, where else can people find you? Where else are you visible nowadays?
Yeah, so wherever people are listening to this amazing podcast with the best podcast name that there is, you can find my podcast as well. It's called The Model Health Show. And just very grateful to say we've been number one in the US many times over. We just have a good time, and we do master classes on various subjects relating to health, but all aspects of health. And of course, you can pick up the book anywhere books are sold, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Target stores, your independent local bookstore. Be a part of this movement. We're actually in a collaboration with Target for a 2021 wellness campaign. And this is a time we need to get our citizens healthier. This is, I, the benefit of this time is that so much is in flux. Whereas the systems before, we had many festering issues going on. And Dr. C, you know this. This is why I love your work so much. You've been really working for years to help us to address the issues at their root. Like, let's get rid of the root causes so that we don't have to continue to treat symptoms. And right now in the United States, we have about 200 million folks who are overweight or obese.
Mm.
This is an absolute epidemic, and it's not being talked about. We have about 135 million folks who are type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic right now. It's not okay. And we can change these things. We can get our citizens healthier. We can get our families healthier, our communities healthier. But ultimately, it starts with us. And so I wanted to make sure that this information is available to everyone, and also but in a way that's understandable, that's fun, and we can make this process of health and healing an enjoyable process moving forward.
That's awesome. So yeah, so Shawn, you guys, as you get it, he's inclusive. He's pulling us together. He's got answers. He makes it simple. He's fun to listen to, easy on the eyes, and you can't go wrong here. All right.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again for hanging out with us. And listeners, we'll see y'all real soon. Next episode, medical myths, legends, and fairy tales. Hey, Dr. Christianson here. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode. Is there a topic you'd like me to cover? I'd love to hear from you. Just go to Dr. Alan Christianson on Facebook or Instagram, write your question, and use the hashtag medical myths. Did you find this show helpful? If so, please take a minute and leave us a rating on iTunes so that others can know. Thanks much, and I'll be back with you real soon. Bye-bye.